Oh boy, this is a personal one, because I used to fall for this. The Galactic Empire from Star Wars are not the good guys whatsoever. I know that sounds obvious, but just like any fictional story, people will try too hard to give alternative ideas that don't work. And there can usually be a cult-like devotion to maintaining an unjustifiable position. You may or may not know that there's a minority of people who try to defend Syndrome in The Incredibles, for example. Even though he was a supervillain who sold his inventions to corrupt governments and T-word organizations, and has many moments of being cold and remorseless. Two examples that are back-to-back is trying to kill Mr. Incredible's wife when she approaches his island on a plane. He refuses to call off the missiles, even after learning that there are children on board, and after Mr. Incredible begs him to stop. He then mocks him for killing his whole family, and right afterwards, when Mr. Incredible grabs and threatens to kill his maid Mirage, Syndrome doesn't care and shows indifference. You can tell here that he is clearly supposed to be the bad guy, just by one's basic morality. His plan to render supers obsolete is not driven to create an equal society or anything like that. I mean, after all, he clearly didn't understand what it meant to be a hero. He thought that to be a hero, you had to be tough and strong and threatening, not selfless, compassionate, and having a desire to fight for justice. Also, he killed a bunch of actual superheroes. I could go on, but this is a video about the Galactic Empire. I just wanted to demonstrate how people have a twisted mentality when it comes to morality and stories. This mentality is more common than you think, to find secret good guys where there otherwise are none. Now in today's video, I wanted to respond to two videos by one channel, that being the now inactive Beard vs. Geek, who created the very two videos that fooled me into thinking the Empire did nothing wrong. The first is 7 Ways the Empire is Good, and the second was a follow-up called 10 Reasons Why the Rebels are T-Words, both of which were made around the release of Rogue One. To be fair, I think the guy fell into a cavalcade of misconceptions himself, and he spread said misconceptions to where a 13-year-old me also fell for it, but I wanted to address it regardless, as it's an Empire Did Nothing Wrong video that I can be sure was serious and not satire when it was made. So let's begin.
With the new Star Wars Rogue One movie coming out in just a couple of weeks, I am here to defend the Galactic Empire and to prove to you that to the average citizen of the galaxy, the Empire is actually a good thing.
Yeah, as you can tell, the first pitfall is to only look at this from the average citizen's perspective in-universe. This won't hold up for numerous reasons anyways, but it's important to remember that we are given far more information about the Empire's rise than a citizen in-universe.
Today, I am defending the Galactic Empire and proving that the average citizen had a pretty good life under the reign of the Empire.
In the films, it's very much heavily suggested that this is not the case. And in the expanded universe, it's absolutely not the case, especially for a non-human alien. And in Disney canon, while muddling the Empire up a lot and making it far too diverse and accepting, it's still presented as authoritarian in works like Star Wars Rebels. I mean, in the film continuity alone, as soon as the Rebels won the Battle of Endor, the entire galaxy cheered at the demise of the Emperor. And even in the Imperial capital, statues of the Emperor were taken down. What does that tell you? Because to me, it tells me that the Emperor and his regime were very unpopular, even in the galactic capital.
The actual creation of the Empire was actually relatively bloodless, according to the average citizen.
According to the average citizen. Yeah, he's gonna roll with this a lot.
Now, you and I know all the shady stuff that happened behind the scenes, but to the average citizen, it looks like the Empire arose and ended the Clone Wars.
Why doesn't what the audience knows not matter? Shouldn't we factor in the shady way the Empire actually rose?
All the average citizen knew is that a lawfully elected representative claimed himself as emperor, took direct control of the military, and resolved the issue. War done, time to rebuild. Therefore, that's setting them off on a good note. according to the average citizen.
Even from the perspective of the average citizen, this isn't even universally true. While Republic citizens were fine, citizens living in separatist-controlled territory that the Empire took back were probably not happy to live under a new government that was going to punish them for their transgressions during the Clone Wars.
This was not some bloody, massive revolution that got brought about, which is what the rebellion wants.
Incorrect. The Clone Wars was orchestrated by Palpatine to be as bloody and violent as possible to allow the Empire to exist. If you have to incite a galaxy-wide war to bring an empire into existence, then it's not really a peaceful reform, is it? This is actually something that the average observant citizen should be able to at least partially pick up on. That the war led to the Empire existing, just not the part where the elected leader was behind it all along. But that second part is still very important.
Now, during the course of the Clone Wars, we know that the Banking Clan and the Trade Federation took massive hits, and actually the leaders of the Trade Federation were bumped off and were completely wiped out because they were part of the Separatists.
Yeah, as greedy as the Trade Federation higher-ups were, Palpatine was completely thankless in how he decided to repay them. He had Vader execute them when they, at the very least, were entitled to a trial. Obviously, the reason the trial didn't happen was because Palps couldn't risk Newt Gunray, for example, spilling the beans.
And people were worried about their Republic credits. Were they any good? Because, after all, not everybody honored them in the galaxy.
Tatooine isn't even in Republic or Imperial space, so this is irrelevant. Any citizen in the Empire would gain no benefit from moving from Republic to Imperial credits.
Came the Empire, and with that, Imperial credits. And very quickly, the Emperor established dominance in the economic trade, making a centralized banking system, establishing intergalactic trade, and part of the expansion program led to new resources and new economic opportunities.
Is there any evidence that this actually benefited the average citizen? You don't provide any, and that's the important thing.
So trade began to flourish under the Empire, and the Imperial credit became a staple economic force in the galaxy.
Also, just because the Empire had a strong economy does not mean that the average citizen benefited from it. This is an incredibly sweeping statement with no explanation for how the average person had a better life than in the Republic, especially when they gave away their basic freedoms in exchange for peace, which again, the Emperor caused to begin with, secretly.
You see, the Empire wanted to expand into the outer reaches of the galaxy and to secure that outer rim. A lot of that had to do with taking down the crime syndicates that emerged, wanting to fill the void and take advantage of the Republic that just shattered and fell apart.
They didn't really do much about crime syndicates though. In fact, they allowed parties like the Hutts to exist, even though they had the power to stop them. This means that the Empire was pretty selectively choosing what crimes to crack down on and what not to. I also want to point out that the Empire enforced a lot of unfair laws, such as no free speech, on the average citizen.
So because of that, the Empire actually went out to eradicate corruption and eradicate criminal forces, both in the inner ring, outer ring, all over the freaking galaxy, and they were successful.
And yet Shizor was a thing by the events of Shadows of the Empire. That's over 20 years after the establishment of the regime. More than enough time to get rid of the Black Sun. In reality, the Empire was mostly cracking down on crime related to their own unfair laws. That's not effectiveness or even justice. It's tyranny.
Now, at the beginning of A New Hope, Han Solo is one of the few smugglers that hasn't been caught by the Empire. And he is praised in the criminal sections because of that, because after all, the Empire will find you.
I thought Han Solo had a bounty put on him by Jabba the Hutt, a central kingpin in the criminal underworld, which kind of proves that he was not well liked in the criminal enterprise, as well as the Empire not liking him either.
Also, this expansionist policy and wanting to increase the military forces allowed for a bunch of jobs to be added to the workforce during a time of a galactic economy that wasn't doing very well.
I'm pretty sure that's because the Emperor had everything destroyed in the Clone Wars, and then showed up and played hero by pretending to help them rebuild. I think the important thing to note is that Palps was only pretending to help people from a problem he caused that he was now selling the solution to.
So that allowed poorer sections to enlist into the army, to be trained in key skills that could help them after they get out of the army. Sound familiar?
Again, this is a problem that Palpatine created that he was now selling back to the people of the galaxy. You also don't mention that pretty much the most sustainable job that most people in the Empire could get were in the military, which the Empire overspent their resources on. So there was little way someone on a poor Outer Rim planet could actually get a job that wasn't in the military. The Empire knew this, and it's why they targeted worlds with desperate people left over from the Clone Wars, which the Emperor started to join the army because it was easy to get recruits to go fight in the Empire's wars and conquests.
Plus, the new systems that got brought into the Empire during this campaign brought new resources as well as a new labor force and trade opportunities, solving the economic crisis left over from the Republic.
I wanted to talk about the example he uses, because he is totally misguided.
Now, a good example of this is the Imperial Registration Program. This was a program that was instituted on the planet Lothal. Now, what this program did, it took a planet that had a huge unemployment rate, and they said, hey, if you want to, you can sign up. We will send you to the inner core and have you work in the Imperial Fleet Yards. Thousands of people took up this program. They moved, they were employed, they got paid, they got housed, and that significantly decreased the amount of people on Lothal that were unemployed and that were starving. There you go, folks. The Empire done good.
So I looked up the Imperial Registration Program on Wikipedia, and according to what I could find, the main source for all these benefits is in-universe Imperial propaganda. Even though this mostly exists in Disney canon, the source is completely unreliable. And given I imagine this information is closely tied to Star Wars Rebels, it's worth noting that the Empire always spins things they do in the most positive way possible, and even falsify information. So looking beyond the fact that this is all Disney canon, this Disney canon source doesn't even prove the Empire is good, given its completely unreliable propaganda. But I guess you can see why I fell for this, because this guy didn't specify that the source was literally Imperial propaganda.
Now you might say, hey, Taylor, what are you talking about? The Empire's totally bad, man. Like, they had a whole bunch of military campaigns. They killed millions of people. To the average citizen, the military campaigns were actually a good thing.
I really doubt that. But let's see how you spin this as good.
Because they did wipe out bad elements, they did wipe out threats that would otherwise jeopardize their security. And from an entire galaxy that just came out of a massive, massive war, of course, they're okay if a military campaign is fighting outside forces, not each other. This caused huge booms to the military industry and to everything that supports the military industry, which includes all sorts of different metals, all sorts of different electrical components. A wide array of industries got government contracts in order to help this military effort, which accumulated in the creation of Death Star 1.
That's a good thing? I'm pretty sure Star Wars lore made it clear that the Empire built the Death Star using slave labor, that were then immediately annihilated by the thing they created to maintain the secret, until the Empire destroyed Alderaan. Now I know this guy is about to try and justify the Death Star. I've seen this video before, but the fact this guy is mostly using in-universe propaganda and bringing up the military complex, which we know the Empire completely overspent on, for the explicit purpose on cracking down on civilians, kinda tells us that the Empire was an authoritarian police state. That is not a good thing. It's clearly presented that the Empire basically relies on people to join an oversized military if they want a decent wage. Anyone who doesn't is left to dry out. In a galaxy that the Emperor damaged through the Clone Wars on purpose. Look, most people wouldn't realize that the Emperor rigged the game from the very start, but it's worth noting that after nearly 20 years, it became very clear that the Emperor was a tyrant, as we got further and further away from the Clone Wars, and at the very least, manipulated the outcome of the war to make him dictator for life. This was only reinforced once he disbanded the Senate, shattering the illusion of representatives for the Empire and destroying Alderaan. It's worth noting that a lot of characters, such as Crix Maydeen, were actually Imperial defectors to the rebel cause, because by then he saw that the Empire was tyrannical, and he had a moral compass. This isn't stated in the films, but one only needs to play Dark Forces to find this out. The destruction of Alderaan really caused a rift in Imperials who started to question the Empire and decided to defect to the rebellion.
Another reason why the Empire was good for the average citizen is that this allowed a lot of citizens to have more direct access to their political system of government. Issues were resolved a lot faster. You would never have something like the Trade Federation embargo of Naboo.
That was a problem that the Emperor created. So far, this guy is looking at things from the average citizen's perspective. There is a reason why the Empire had its supporters, and it's because they, at least at the start, had no idea about the Emperor's grand plan. In case you didn't watch the prequel trilogy, it shows how the Emperor rigged the system to allow an even worse government to exist. The Empire. Most people in the galaxy did not know this, but this doesn't make the Empire good.
That would never happen. And if it were to happen, it would get addressed swiftly and decisively.
I don't really agree with this at all, because if it was the Empire that did something to the people, the Emperor wouldn't have done anything about it. The Emperor didn't care whatsoever for the average person. The Empire would only focus on problems that threatens the stability of the Empire. The Empire also did not commit atrocities in public. A lot of it was behind the scenes or built off of pre-existing stigma, such as anti-alien policies, which was carried over from the Republic but only further enforced.
And as far as the Emperor goes, he still provided for his people.
No, he didn't!
Yeah, of course he had another agenda. Everyone does. Every politician in the old Senate does. Every Jedi does.
But unlike most of everyone else, if anyone actually knew about the agenda of Palpatine, he wouldn't have been around for very long. If it came out tomorrow that US President Trump had secretly been behind the war in Ukraine or the war in Palestine to give himself more power, there would have been a public outcry. Okay, that's only half true. The hardcore MAGA people would still have his back. Trump is like the only one who could get away with what Palpatine did if the secret came out. But the point is, Palpatine's secret agenda, how he manipulated everything to happen the way it did, causing a massive war to gain ultimate power, that is not excusable. Saying that he just had an agenda, like anyone else, is downplaying the situation.
But his personal plans did not really hinder that of the progress of the entire galaxy.
Yeah, tell that to every system and world left without electricity, or even clean water during the Clone Wars. Tell that to every alien race the Empire genocided out of existence. Hell, tell that to the surviving Jedi of Order 66, who were absolutely entitled to a court-martial.
It was just a personal hobby, like our president golfing. The majority of the time, it doesn't affect the average citizen.
Oh yeah, starving a bunch of captured Jedi and forcing them to fight each other for your amusement is totally like golfing. Blood sport is still sport after all.
And ultimately, the Empire's alternative goal is to have a new apprentice. Sound familiar?
Donald Trump is pretty ruthless with how he gets and discards potential apprentices, not gonna lie, but it's nothing compared to the Emperor. In case you didn't keep track of the way Palpatine gets a new apprentice, it's typically by scheming against them and testing them to see if they're still strong enough. Otherwise, they die. It's as cutthroat as it gets, and it's not ethical whatsoever. It might provide the best hardened apprentice, but it's not right.
Now let's talk about the Rebels. First off, people, if you're a big fan of the Rebels, congratulations, you're a fan of terrorists. That's right, freaking terrorists.
Yeah, dude, Osama bin Laden did nothing wrong, y'all.
Because the rebels want to take down a well-established system of government that is actually benefiting quadrillions of people in the galaxy.
Well, clearly the people in the rebellion had a reason to rebel against the Empire and try to take it down. Can you explain why the motive was not pure? Also, another thing to note. Even if there's a rebel group against, I don't know, Denmark, or some other well-liked government, they're not T-words unless they do something immoral. You see, while the definition of a T-word can get muddled, and it has been for the past 100 years, the negative connotation should specifically apply to groups that target civilians and cause collateral damage on non-government targets for the purpose of spreading fear. That's absolutely what 9/11 was. 9/11 was against the American government, but they targeted innocent people in the process. And the violence led to many more innocent deaths in the Middle East. I suppose it's just the cycle of violence, but Osama bin Laden didn't do much to make his hatred of America sympathetic to many, especially since he targeted the World Trade Center. Okay, enough with the consequences of 9/11. The point I'm making is that the rebels are a freedom-fighting group, trying to bring down a corrupt autocracy. Those leading the rebellion, like Mon Mothma, tried her hardest to avoid civilian casualties, and tried to target military complexes to weaken the Empire. That is not T-wordism. I just wanted to point out that even if the rebels are trying to take down a non-tyrannical government, their conduct of fighting the Empire is not wrong.
Yeah, there are going to be injustices here and there, just like with any system of government.
Dude, the Empire more than crosses the line of a few injustices. There are multiple genocides, countless unfair laws, and crackdown on opponents.
By not just blowing up one, but 2 Death Stars, the rebels succeeded in throwing the entire galaxy into economic ruin and a massive recession.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Empire was going to bring people into a recession anyways by blowing up planets which would have done nothing but destroy resources, land, and people. Also, when I heard about the recession thing, it was based on an estimate done by an economics expert in the real world. But the Star Wars galaxy is not the real world. I doubt there is any evidence that the destruction of the Death Stars caused a recession in-universe. It was an estimate done by an economics expert who probably didn't even know the full logistics of the Star Wars universe on what would happen, quote, realistically. This is not a valid argument. Even if you want to consider the idea that a recession happened, that can be blamed on the Empire wasting so much money on the Death Star, a planet killer that was meant to oppress the galaxy. And when it was blown up by a freedom-fighting force, the Empire did not help things by just increasing taxes on the average citizen, so that they could build another one that was then again swiftly destroyed. I mean, it was either a recession, or the Empire literally enslaving the galaxy. Take your pick.
Now, the rebels do not care, they do not discriminate about who they kill. As far as they're considered, if you wear the uniform and if that's your job, you're dead. You're as bad as the Emperor.
The thing is, however, that anyone wearing the uniform is not a civilian, but instead a military target, which is free game, and not T-wordism.
Bob, down and counting, in the Death Star, is just as evil as the Emperor himself, and equally deserves to die. That's right, rebels. You killed millions of innocent people who were just punching a clock doing their 9-to-5 job.
Again, wearing the uniform of the Empire makes you a military target, not a civilian one. Also, Taylor, can I ask that you provide the Wikipedia page for Bob, or did you just make him up?
Now, these rebels don't actually have a system of government in place that they want to put in. Except for, a vague idea of bringing back the old, inefficient republic.
Yeah, better the Empire, right? With all the genocides and atrocities. Go Empire!
How is that going to work? When are you going to have elections? How are you going to provide for the average man? How are you going to keep away criminal elements? How are you going to stabilize the economy after you just wrecked it?
Is there any evidence that they wrecked the economy, though? Again, this is all based on some economic douchebag's estimate of what would happen in the real world. But this isn't the real world.
And being a rebel does not pay well at all. I mean, just look at terrorist group today. ISIS still can't replace those freaking monkey bars after a couple of years.
The Rebel Alliance isn't about the paycheck, though. It's about fighting to restore freedom to the galaxy. That's the commitment. In case you didn't watch Star Wars, Han Solo's arc is literally about fighting for something larger than himself. And that's how he became a hero, instead of a petty scoundrel in the end. Yeah, I know, The Force Awakens really ruined that.
And that's a good thing. Because after all, as the average citizen, we want peace, we want stability, we want enough money to feed our families, and that's what the Empire gives us, not the rebels.
And finished. Okay, so the way this guy thinks about this topic is really skewed. It's basically spinning the Empire's actions in a way where they look like the good guys, and not an objective assessment of their actions. Most of the evidence is flimsy, and not understanding how wars and rebellions work. Plus ignoring the intentions of George Lucas with all this, and how the Empire is clearly meant to represent fascist and authoritarian tyranny that was obtained through a ruse. The Empire is as low and self-centered as it gets. And that's why the rebels exist. Now, in the real world, rebellions often replace one regime with another, but that's clearly not what happened in Star Wars. The rebellion was built to restore the Republic, and the rebels tried to the best of their ability to not fight dirty. And it's not like it was easy, but it was achieved nonetheless. Because the rebellion understood that they had to win the hearts and minds of the people, and they couldn't do that by punching as low as the Empire. That's the whole point. The rebels are meant to represent freedom fighting, not T-wordism, from a tyrannical regime. So with that being said, I think I've made my point clear, but this guy made a follow-up video talking about what he spoke about in this video, but focusing more on the rebels. Let's analyze that, and then we can sleep.
Are the rebels really the good guys in Star Wars?
Yes!
Today we're talking about Star Wars, and I'm going to give you 10 reasons why the Rebel Alliance is actually the bad guys in the Star Wars saga.
I hope you're not going to spew more misconceptions.
Now, some of this comes from Rogue One, so spoilers.
Yeah, I suppose Rogue One did a lot to say that the rebels aren't as virtuous, but at the same time, that's done by Disney, so
in no particular order, let's start with number 1. Killing informants in the off chance that they will talk. That's right, at the very beginning of Rogue One, we see Cassian kill in cold blood his informant.
Gee, that would be a good point, if not for the fact that it was Disney who wrote this. The same clowns who don't understand Star Wars at all. And more specifically, the symbolic role of the characters and factions. Even then, this was a choice Andor made on his own. Andor is literally a bad egg in a faction that tries its best to be moral. And I think that was the point with Andor. What happens when someone who isn't the best guy in the world joins the rebellion? There are going to be those who bend the rules. Look, Rogue One is better than most of the dog shit that comes out today. And it was back before people realized that Disney completely screwed things over. Because the fall of Rome didn't happen in a day.
Supposedly a friend who, yes, he was nervous because obviously he's performing an illegal act, but he was trying to help out the rebellion. And in return, what does he get? A laser blast to the back. Good job, rebels. You're the good guys, right?
Again, this does not fall on the rebellion as a whole.
Moving on, number 2. Breaking out a convicted criminal and then manipulating said criminal to do your bidding. Now, I'm not exactly 100% familiar with recruitment tactics of military groups, but as far as I know, kidnapping criminals and then manipulating them to do your bidding is not an okay thing to do.
Aside from the guy not stating the proper context for any of this, I don't see how this is such an evil act, but let's see how this guy describes it.
Now, the Empire in this situation is actually the good guys. They found someone who is breaking the law. They tried and convicted that person who is breaking the law, and they sentenced them to literally help build a better community.
In the film, it's not specified why Jyn Erso was being sent to do hard labor, but this guy just assumes that Jyn Erso wasn't a victim of unfair Imperial laws.
Since Jyn Erso was going off to a labor camp. Now, labor camps are not just doing stupid labor that gets nothing accomplished. You're actually building something. What you work on goes to better other people outside of yourself and help civilization as a whole. Therefore, the rebels, by doing this act, are not just saying this is how we get new recruits. They're also saying we don't believe that people should repay their debts to society.
I love how you assume that the labor camp was being used to benefit the average person, and also that it wasn't just Auschwitz in Star Wars. Not all labor camps are like that, buddy. Now again, we don't know what the labor camp is like in the film itself, but according to external material, it was practically a death camp with no person surviving for more than 2 years. So one had to hope that their sentence was shorter than that.
Number 3, performing assassinations. Now, in the real world, assassinations are sometimes necessary, but generally speaking, they're not an okay thing to do.
That sounds so weird in and out of context.
Well, according to the Rebel Alliance, they're perfectly fine. So who do you think they're going to assassinate? Maybe the source of all their problems? The Emperor himself? Nah. Instead, we'll kill a scientist. That's right. In Rogue One, the main mission of the Rebels is to kill a scientist who was persuaded to be the architect of the Death Star.
Okay, first, the Emperor is a hard-to-reach target. So obviously the rebels had to take out targets in order to weaken the Empire to make the Emperor easier to reach. Galen, in the eyes of the rebellion, is a war criminal for building the Death Star. They probably wouldn't know that all the horrible things he did was because he was forced to. When you've got me defending Disney Star Wars, you know you fucked up in life.
Now, they could have performed some more intelligence, found out what the guy's motives were, whether or not he was a horrible person, but no, they'll just kill him because of his job. Because after all, no one else could do that job, right?
I don't know how the rebellion could have known anything about who Galen was as a person. And again, he was publicly a war criminal.
Number 4, staging attacks in places where civilians can be wounded and killed. Also in Rogue One, we see a group of rebels who stage an attack against a couple of troopers in their transport tank thing. Dude,
the movie makes it very clear that those rebels aren't even a part of the main alliance, and that they're extremists.
In a very busy marketplace, therefore putting the lives of innocent men, women, and children in danger.
Again, this does not fall on the main rebellion.
At least when you have government power fighting against government power, you have clear uniforms, you have clear battlefields. Well, when you have a terrorist group fighting against a government state, battles take place around innocent people. Battles take place where people who are not combative personnel can be killed. Sound familiar?
It's clear that this guy doesn't understand who Saw Gerrera's partisans are and their relationship to the main rebellion under Mon Mothma. Basically, he's saying that all rebels are bad because this one splinter faction did this. It's weak argumentation and an inability to understand the story presented.
Number 5, killing non-combative military personnel. Now, when two government bodies are fighting, then there's an understanding that if the soldier across from you is not a direct threat to you, then that soldier can be taken as a prisoner of war. The rebels closed the door on that very quickly.
Do you have any evidence that the rebels kill those trying to surrender, aside from maybe the partisans who aren't allied with the main rebel alliance anyways?
If you wear the uniform of the Empire, you are just as evil as the Emperor himself. Which gives you a new look as far as the destruction of the Death Star goes. Bob down in accounting, who's just making sure that people got paid and punching a clock to get a decent job, just as evil as the Emperor.
The thing is that Bob doesn't exist.
Jill, in HR, who was trying to make sure that everyone was treated fairly, just as evil as the Emperor.
The thing is that Jill doesn't exist. Also, the idea that the Empire has a division that makes sure everyone is treated fairly within the military is laughable. Where was someone like Jill when Vader was choking those admirals?
Steve, the sous chef, making sure that people got fed, just as evil as the Emperor. See where I'm going with this?
The thing is that Steve doesn't exist. I'm sure that someone like Steve existed on the Death Star, but he was stationed on a military space station. Killing him by blowing up the Death Star is not a war crime.
Whereas if it was actually two governments fighting against each other, Bob, Jill, and Steve could be taken as prisoners of war. This was not the case with the Rebel Alliance. If you wear the uniform, if you punch the clock, if you help the Emperor in any way, you're a dead person.
So are you saying that the rebels should have landed on the Death Star, only shot those who were directly used for combat, then taken all the non-combat people as prisoners of war, then blown up the Death Star? Do you know how stupid and impractical that sounds?
Number 6. Plunging the galaxy into a massive recession. Twice.
Again, there's no evidence that the destruction of the Death Stars plunged the galaxy into a massive recession.
Now, if you've seen my previous video, 7 Good Things the Empire has actually done, this will sound rather familiar.
It's also very, very wrong.
And if you haven't seen it, go ahead and watch it. It's a pretty cool video.
It was also very skewed and not based in logic.
Now, the Emperor and the Empire itself has established a very clear and working system of economy that stretches not only in a couple of systems, but the entire freaking galaxy. What did the rebels do? By blowing up a couple of Death Stars, they plunged people into debt. They plunged people into a recession.
Aside from my previous arguments, this guy doesn't even attempt to explain how the Death Stars being destroyed would cause a recession. There's no technical explanation. And again, this is based on what an economics expert, who I doubt was a Star Wars nerd, said would happen realistically.
Now we've just dealt with a, one planet or a couple of country recession going on very recently.
Reminder, this video was published in January 2017.
And we had the Great Depression back in the 30s. That's one planet. What about an entire galaxy?
Where is the evidence that they caused a recession, though?
For more on that, go ahead and watch that video. Number 7, waging a guerrilla war against a system of government that helps out quadrillions of people throughout an entire galaxy.
And as I pointed out, you can wage a war against the country Perfect Land and not be a T-word group.
This may seem obvious, but this is pretty much the definition of a rebel terrorist. Okay? Someone who attacks and who outright tries to overthrow a proper system of government that helps out trillions of people.
They do not help trillions of people, though. And if they do, it was absolutely from a problem the Emperor caused to begin with, and he was just selling back the solution. Not virtuous in the slightest.
Now, is the Empire perfect? No, of course it isn't. No system of government is perfect. Again, you should probably watch that video that I made previously. It will answer a lot of your questions.
Yeah, the next time the Chinese Communist Party spouts out news that unemployment is at an all-time low, we shouldn't question them at all. They run the show. They would never lie.
But simply waging a guerrilla-style warfare causes massive amounts of collateral damage. The fact that the rebels do not wear any uniforms unless they're in a fighter plane.
Well, actually, the rebels do wear uniforms, in case you didn't watch the original trilogy. Also, for most of Rogue One even, the rebels were working undercover, in disguises, or they were the bloody partisans who weren't even the good guys to begin with.
Means that it is very difficult for the Empire to determine exactly who is their enemy. Therefore, civilian casualties are going to happen. This occurs whenever a guerrilla war is waged and there are no clear uniforms.
I can't believe I fell for this back in the day, because this is so obviously wrong. The rebels consistently wear matching uniforms in the original trilogy.
Of course there's going to be civilian casualties because the soldiers can't clearly understand who is their enemy and who is not their enemy. The soldiers, of course, are going to treat everyone with heavy suspicion because at any one time, someone could pull out a blaster and shoot you.
Who? The Rebel Alliance or the partisans?
Now you might say, in the first movie, there was Alderaan, there was Uncle Owen and Aunt Peru, there was the Jawas. Well, Alderaan we're going to talk about a little bit later. Let's address the Jawas and Aunt Peru and Uncle Owen. The Jawas are criminals. Not only did they steal droids and then turn around and sell them to other people without trying to find an original owner, without looking for any sort of bill of sale, But they found droids that had top secret military information. Therefore, the Jawas, coming in contact with this information and being criminals in the first place, yeah, they're gonna die, because holding that top secret information means that you're a rebel. Therefore, a traitor to the Empire and a outright insurgent.
Except they weren't insurgents. And stealing droids is far too minuscule for the death penalty. And it's not like the Empire actually cared about them stealing droids. It was all about the Death Star plans.
Uncle Owen and Aunt Peru, pretty much the same. They had these droids that had top secret information in them, and they didn't just have them for, an hour. They had them for at least a day, possibly 2.
That doesn't sound like a long time to me, within the context of the story.
That is more than enough time for them to make copies and distribute it to other rebels, if they were rebels.
But they weren't rebels. And the Empire had no reason to think they were rebels. And they weren't even detained. They were just presumably killed. That's fucked up.
So of course they're going to be classified as hostiles when they had this information and they had a son that they could not account for. That son was probably relaying that information to other rebels.
You're basically just saying that the Empire assumed that they were rebels without doing a proper investigation. And instead of just detaining them, they executed them. That is not ethical conduct. Innocent until proven guilty.
Now, if the Empire was so dead set on killing innocent civilians, they could have very easily wiped out Mos Eisley, which does have a strong criminal element to it, and could have easily solved their problems.
Yeah, but I don't think the Empire wanted to deal with the Hutts, because remember, this was not their world.
But they didn't. They sent troopers to go door to door, checking IDs, making sure that innocent people were not in harm's way, unlike the rebels, who do not care.
Strange how they didn't use that same mentality when it came to the Jawas, or Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. I guess you have to live in a town or city to be eligible for inspections.
Number 8. Celebrating in the killing of innocent people and taking part in cannibalism.
What?
At the end of Return of the Jedi, there is a massive party scene where they celebrate the destruction of Death Star 2, which had a lot of engineers, contract workers, people who were building the damn things, civilian labor.
Yeah, I doubt the second Death Star had civilian labor, given its top secret nature, like the first Death Star. Again, anyone who died on the Death Star when it was destroyed was directly tied to the military, not a war crime.
And then the Ewoks are there, and they're playing drums off of presumably just the helmets of their fallen enemies. Well, previously, those Ewoks were going to eat Han, Leia, Luke. So if there's a giant party, there's going to be some drinking, there's going to be some food. The rebels ate people. The Empire doesn't do that.
This is such a stretch. The helmets are not a sign of cannibalism. They're a sign that the Ewoks removed helmets off of dead troopers. And is there any evidence that the Ewoks serve stormtroopers as food for the rebels? There isn't. And that's the point.
Number 9. Convincing civilian planets to supply them with munitions, therefore putting them in danger. Now, the rebels need to get weapon supplies from somewhere, right? Well, according to canon, they got Alderaan to supply them with munitions.
Keep in mind that Alderaan's government did this, not the average citizen.
They also used Alderaan's political envoys as mules for passing along information and supplies to rebel forces, therefore making Alderaan not an innocent planet after all. Alderaan was directly opposed to the Empire and was committing treason.
So the Empire investigated, found out who was conspiring in that treason, and arrested those specifically involved. Oh, wait.
In most systems of government today, committing treason during a time of war is punishable by death. And that is the same law that the Empire used.
So they targeted the whole planet, instead of just arresting and convicting those actually committing treason.
They were in a state of war with the rebels. The rebels convinced the planet to supply them with munitions that would directly be used to fight the Emperor and the Empire, giving Governor Tarkin the proper authority and reason to blow up their planet.
In case you didn't watch the film though, Tarkin made it clear that this was a show of force to spread fear, not an act of justice against treason.
Fear will keep the local systems in line.
They targeted Alderaan and indiscriminately killed a population, who you can bet over 99% of its population had nothing to do with the treason.
Number 10. Using mind control for their own gain. That's right, like several terrorist organizations today, the rebels use brainwashing and mind control in order to achieve their own ends.
Yeah, I disagree. Let's see what examples you use.
In the first movie, Obi-Wan Kenobi uses it to get past a checkpoint.
That's not brainwashing, you silly goose. He literally used that to get past a checkpoint. He wasn't brainwashing anyone.
Later on, after Luke is trained in the Force, he uses it for his own gains to make sure that he is safe and protected, and to get his friends out of danger, which he put in danger in the first place.
It was an attempt to rescue Han Solo, and he also didn't even mind trick a stormtrooper. It was one of Jabba's goons, and after that, he wraps up the video. So we're finished. So to sum everything up, this guy uses false equivalences and misinformation to promote his point that the Empire is good. They weren't. Aside from it not being George's intention, the Empire is clearly evil from a basic moral standpoint, and relying on propaganda and trying to focus on those serving in military bases, and sometimes even getting things flat out incorrect. But still, I fell for this back in the day. I suppose without knowing as much as I did about Star Wars, and being interested in the trope of people saying that X character or faction are secretly the good guys, I fell for the scam. But regardless, the Empire is unjustifiable, and all material paints to them as the bad guys, except for Battlefront 2. Except that it's clearly in-universe propaganda, so that doesn't even count. The Empire is meant to represent tyrannical fascism, and they are not the good guys. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain, were you praying at the